I've been doing videos for about 5 years now, and most of the questions I get are about buying land here in Montana. Because of that, I decided to put together a comprehensive video that covers everything I've ever run into while selling land around the state. I will talk about all the things you need to think about. I will go over some great websites and apps that you can use while looking for land, and at the end, I will even show you a website that can show you the well depths in a certain area. And if you don't want to sit through this entire video, I've put together a printed summary and checklist of everything you need to know when buying land here in Montana. Just email me at montanaliferealty@gmail.com and I'll send it right out. Let's get to the video. All right, so I climbed all the way up this mountain to give you a better view of Montana. So the least you can do is subscribe to our channel. And when you do, don't forget to hit the little bell and you'll be notified every time we make a new video about Montana. So if you're going to buy land in Montana, the first and most obvious thing you want to make sure you find are all of the property corners. And you may think that's crazy and obvious, but there's been numerous times where people have bought land thinking the line is where it really isn't. There's, like I said, tons of stories about that. So make sure you find all the property corners or have a surveyor do it. As you can see right here, if you look at the pin, and if there's still a stake in the ground like this, at the bottom of it you should find a piece of rebar with a code on the top, and the code will match up to the plat map, which you can see right here. So that's one of the things that if you don't have a surveyor and you're just going off of the pins that you find in an area, make sure they match up to the numbers on the plat map. The next thing you want to check out is figure out how far you are away from utilities. So if you want to build your house way back there, let's say, you may have to pull your power a few hundred yards or a quarter mile, depending on where you're going, and that's obviously going to add cost to the house. So you want to make sure you know where all of that is. If you're in a subdivision that, in a town or just outside of town that's developed and not up in the mountains, then obviously the utilities are going to usually be right out at the street on your lot. But if you're buying a big piece of property up in the mountains, you want to make sure you know where the utilities are and where you're going to put your house, so you know how far you're going to have to pull your power to get it in there. So if you are buying a lot up in the mountains or outside of town, you're not going to be able to hook up to city water, so you're going to have to drill a well. And a lot of people don't realize how expensive that can be, and before you buy a lot, you should make sure you know what the well depths are in that area, because that can add up to $50,000 to the price of your lot if you have to go real deep for water. In this valley it varies widely. There's some wells that are 30 feet deep, there's some that are close to 1,000 feet deep. So before you buy a lot, you make sure that you know that added cost you're going to have for drilling that well. And obviously, even if the wells in the neighborhood are at 300 feet, let's say, that doesn't guarantee the spot you pick is going to be the same depth. So it will give you a good idea if you go to the water department and check the well depths off of the different well logs in the area. It'll give you a pretty good idea, and it should be close, but again, there's no guarantees once you start drilling the well that it's going to be the depth you thought it was going to be. So always have enough money to cover you at that point. And like I talked about in the building the house video, the first thing you want to do is drill your well, because if you end up spending way more on the well than you thought you were going to on the house, you're going to have to rethink your plans and figure out the finances in order to make everything work, because obviously you're going to need water. The other thing out on lots that are out in the country is you're going to not have access to city sewer, so you're going to have to do a septic tank. And all of the lots will have been, before they can sell them off, they have to do a percolation test on the ground to figure out what type of septic system will be approved, or even if they approve a septic system out there. So you'll have to look at those details on the property map, and it'll be platted out where they've approved the septic system. So again, make sure that fits in with where you want to put your house. If they put the septic right in the best spot of the lot to build your house, then you're going to have to go and get that changed, and that costs a lot of money and delays in order to get that done. Nowadays, septic systems are 10 to 15 grand, and it's depending on the size of your house, and it's going to depend on the type of ground you're on as well. So these are things that you need to keep in mind if you're buying property outside of town or up in the mountains somewhere. Another thing people don't think about when they're buying big pieces of property, or even small, but it's usually when you get the bigger pieces of property, is if you're walking around the land and you see this and you're not sure what this road is for or where it's going, it could be an easement. So you're going to want to check into that and make sure that you know exactly what the title company on the title report will show any easements that are recorded. But if you buy a piece of property and you don't check on this, then all of a sudden you may have people that are driving right through the middle of your property to get to their property that's on the other side, or get wherever. As long as they have a recorded easement, there's nothing you can do about it. So you want to make sure you check that with the title company and make sure you're good with everything, or any easements. There'll be easements for utilities, or the normal ones you see. And there may be, in a lot of these areas around here in the mountains, there may be easements for mineral rights. A lot of times those are very old and they don't really mean much, because the company that claimed these easements did it back in the 1800s and it's still on the records. So a lot of times they're okay, but it's something worth checking into, so you don't end up with a gas company or somebody showing up on your front yard wanting to drill for oil or whatever they're after. So make sure you check those easements and make sure they work for you. And the last thing I want to talk about is, a lot of people want to buy a big piece of land, put in their money on a bigger piece of land, and then they'll just sell off a portion of it in order to pay for what they bought. And that's a good business plan, except it's not that easy. You can't, if you buy a 20-acre lot, it doesn't mean you can split it up into 19 one-acre lots and then you keep an acre. There's all kinds of rules and regulations on splitting the land. It depends on what's been done with that land in the past. It depends on the county. There's all kinds of things. There's all kinds of hoops you have to jump through if you want to split land. Some is easier than others, but make sure, if that's your plan, that you don't just buy 20 acres thinking you're going to sell half of it off, because that may not be an option. Check the zoning, check with the city or the county that you're in, and just make sure you have your bases covered and you know what you're getting into when you buy these pieces of land. Now, let's look at some of the mistakes people have made here when buying land. So if you're buying land, whether it's an investment property or just a place to build your dream house, there are things you need to keep in mind. And the first thing that also relates to regular old real estate is location. You've all heard the line, location, location, location. Well, it matters in land purchases as well. When looking at land, there are a few things you need to take into consideration and think about, especially if you're looking at property in a subdivision that hasn't been built up yet. So take a look at this plat map, and you'll see there's a horseshoe-shaped road coming in. When you first take a glance at it, you'll think, oh, I want the corner lot that's the biggest piece of property and it's near a little common area. But what you may not think about while you're standing out there looking at it is, when the subdivision is built up and you got cars coming in from both sides, the headlights are going to be going right in your front window from either way a car comes into that subdivision. The other thing to keep in mind when you're looking at new subdivisions is, what are they going to build behind your lot? You may think, oh, this is a great lot and it's got great views, but you need to do the research on what's going to happen behind you. Because right now, there may be nothing, but in the future, you could be backed up to a commercial area or another subdivision, and you may end up looking right into the back of someone else's window, whereas right now it looks like you got a great view out of the front and of the back. In the future, it may not be the case. The other big thing people don't think about is the size of the lot. You know, when we first moved up here, I was like everyone else and I wanted a big piece of property, and so we bought a 5-acre piece of property, and it was awesome until I started spending all summer mowing everything just to keep it looking good. I mean, you can let things go natural, and I did try that as well, but then the thing you have to be concerned about is if the grass gets real tall at the end of summer, it's going to dry up like it always does, and then you've got a fire hazard. So the maintenance of a big piece of property is a huge consideration to make. I know everybody wants a big piece of land, but if you're not going to use a lot of it, do you really need that big of a piece of property that you're going to end up spending all summer maintaining? The second mistake I see people making, especially in subdivisions, is they don't check the covenants closely enough. Just about every subdivision is going to have rules and regulations, and you need to look at those closely before buying a piece of property, because they may not allow you to build a shop. Some subdivisions have rules about the size of the house that has to go in, and the look of the house, and the siding on the house, and the type of roof. I mean, I've seen 200-page documents of covenants for different subdivisions, and you can argue that's good or bad, but the point I'm trying to make here is you need to know the rules before you buy the piece of property and then realize you can't build a shop, or you know, the house you've dreamed of building doesn't fit into the guidelines that they've already set up. If you're looking at properties off-grid or way out that aren't really in a subdivision, you should always check the property owners that border your property and see if they can be split, or you know, what if they put a subdivision back there? You know, right now it may seem like a huge open piece of ground, but that may not last. So the key is to do your homework on the surrounding properties as well as your own before you buy. The next two mistakes I see are mainly with off-the-grid type of properties. The big one is the type of land. When I say type of land, I'm talking about the actual soil type, and whether it's rocky or kind of farmland. These are things you need to keep in mind when if you buy a big piece of property off-grid, or even if it's not off-grid, you may have to run your power and utilities a long way in the ground. Well, the price of that could go up immensely if it's really rocky. I've seen a lot of properties around here that it's total rocks, and they have to actually blast to get through some of it in order to run the power or to put in a septic. So it's just things to keep in mind, and the price. You know, you may be getting a good deal on the land, but there may be a reason for that, because you're going to have to spend a ton of money to actually develop that particular piece of property because of all the rock. Another thing to check into on those types of property is make sure you check the well depths in the area. You can get on different sites and they'll have the well logs and the records of the different properties in that area. So you can kind of get a ballpark of how deep the wells are at your neighbors' places or places in the area. And that's not going to be a guarantee that that's going to be the depth of your well, but at least it'll hopefully give you a ballpark figure, and you'll know that, you know, it could be 300 feet or it could be 1,000 feet, just depending on the different well depths in the area. But another thing that can really add a ton of money to the cost of developing a lot is going to be how deep you have to drill a well. The other mistake I see a lot on off-grid properties or properties that are way out is winter access. A lot of times people will be searching for properties when they're out in the summer vacationing, looking around, and they dream of, you know, living off the grid and living way out of town, and they see these gorgeous properties, but they don't think about what it's going to be like in January. There can be situations where you have to plow for miles to get to your property because these roads are not maintained in the winter other than by you. The county's not going to come out and plow it, or the state, so it's going to be totally up to you to be able to get in and out of there in the winter. And that's another thing that you should definitely keep in mind when you're looking at properties in the summertime. Another thing too that comes up is if there's other people along that particular road, there may be a shared road agreement. You need to check into those as well and see how much money each person is chipping in for the maintenance of the road or the plowing of the road or whatever comes up on that particular road. These agreements are going to determine how much money you're going to have to pay or not pay and do yourself in the future. The last mistake I see people making is they don't think about resale value. And I've talked about this with houses, but the average time people own a piece of property is 7 years. And that doesn't matter if it's land or houses. Lives change, people change, and they end up getting rid of them. So you have to look at the resale value of your lot and decide what costs are going to go into it and how that's going to affect the value down the road. If you have to pump a ton of money into it to get it up to what you want, is it really going to sell for the same amount down the road when you go to sell it? That's the thing you should always keep in mind when you're planning on developing your piece of property. The other thing that people don't look at is when a property is listed, as you can see on this plat map here, there's a lot of properties where, for whatever reason, the property pins go out to the middle of the road. So, like on this property, there's gross acreage and net acreage. Well, the gross acreage includes out to the middle of the road, but the road is obviously an easement, so do you really own it? Well, technically it's part of your property, but because it's an easement and this particular one is a county road, it's not like you can go out there and do anything in the middle of the road on quote your property. It's a county road easement, but it shows up in your gross acreage. So when you go to sell the acreage in the future, again, it may show more acreage for sale than actually is usable acreage. So always check the plat map and make sure you know exactly what you're getting, because on bigger pieces of land that border a road, it's going to cut off a lot of square footage or actual property that is part of the gross acreage but isn't really usable land. So you may think you're getting a lot more acreage than you truly are. So if you're out looking for property, keep all these things in mind. Don't make these mistakes, and your land can be developed where in the future you'll make some money on it. This next section is about the app I was telling you about. This is a great app, and I use it all the time. So as you can imagine, if you're looking for property up in a place like this, usually you're out of cell phone range and there's no markers a lot of times for where the property corners are located. And if it's anything bigger than 1 acre, and even if it is marked, you're going to have a hard time figuring out, where the line runs and where exactly the property line is. So if you're looking at trying to figure out where you want to place your house, I'm going to show you a couple things that will help in that respect. And also, you're going to be looking for where if it's already been approved for septic or a well. This app that I'm about to show you is going to help with locating all those things if you're just looking at a plat map. So let's go look at an actual lot and I'll walk around it and show you what I'm talking about. All right, so here we are out at a lot that I recently sold to one of my clients. And as you can see, there's a lot of trees on here, and this is actually a 5-acre lot. So what I'm talking about with this app that I'm about to show you is when you're walking on this lot or any lot like it, you really can't see the property corners because 5 acres is a pretty big area, and you can't see, if you find the pin out at the front, this is on obviously the road out in front is where the front pin is, but I'm down a little ways. So to actually see where the property line is, we have this app, and it's called OnX Hunt, and it's made for hunting, but it's really handy, and I use it all the time for showing properties when you're out in the middle of the woods like this, and you can't always count on any kind of property pins or flags at the corners. So what you'll see with this app here in a second is it has all of the different lots already platted out on it. It shows the owner's name, and it's handy if you're bordering Forest Service land or any kind of national land, or just in a spot like this where you're trying to see where the edges of your property are. So here we go. I'll give you a quick little walk with this app. If you look down on the right side of the screen, you'll see what it shows on your phone, and I'm walking towards the edge of the property, and as you can see, there's a fence there, but if you didn't have this app, you wouldn't know if that's on the line or not. There's fences all over out in the woods, but as you can see, this app shows that this fence is right on the line. Again, you want to be careful and have something surveyed. We'll talk about this later, but this app is pretty close, as you can see, and as we walk further down the lot, you'll see the little GPS dot moving, and again, shows you where you are. It's a great app. So as you saw with the app there, you get a pretty good idea. Obviously, it's not exact, so keep that in mind, but it gives you a pretty close guesstimate of where the lines are. It is GPS, but in some areas it may be more accurate than others depending on where you are on the planet. But this one, as you saw with that fence, shows up pretty well, and it gives you a good idea of where your property lines are. Another thing you can use this for is on a property, a lot of times they're going to show where the well and the septic field have already been approved. So if you're out looking at where a spot to place your house, this will also come in handy. You can look at the plat map like the one I'm showing here, and you can kind of pace off and see with this app where exactly they have platted where the septic is going to go. And if you want to put your house there, obviously you're going to have that changed. So another good thing to use this app for. One thing I did want to say is the names aren't updated real quick. There's so much going on in this area that they haven't, the name on here is the former owners. They no longer own it, but I just wanted to point that out, that it has not been updated yet, and this sale took place probably a month and a half ago. So if you're looking for owners' names, it's not always going to be right up to the minute as to who owns something, but I'm sure it will be updated rather quickly. And you can pay a yearly fee like I did, so you have access to this all the time. I think they do a 2-week trial if you just want to play around with it, or if you're up here looking for property, you can sign up and use it while you're here. And it also works in all 50 states. I just bought the Montana portion, but it is a pretty handy app, and I think it will help you guys out if you're looking for property up here. Another thing you can use it for is, like you can see here, it looks like a road going through here. And you can see if that's an easement or if that's just an area that was cut out, while they were developing this subdivision. But again, check with if you can use this app in conjunction with a plat map that you can get from your agent, myself, or the title company. It'll have any easements marked on there, or any kind of utilities, whatever may be recorded on this piece of property. It will show up, and then if you use this app in conjunction with it, it will come in handy, and it'll give you a good idea of what you're buying exactly, and what you need to look for, and where you want to place your house, and if that's going to come into play with where the septic is, or the well, or any type of easement. So it's a really handy thing, and I just thought I would point that out and give you guys that little tip if you're looking for property up here in the mountains. One little quick story I wanted to share with you guys is I was talking to another agent, this quite a few years ago, and I may have mentioned it in a different video, but it fits right into this video as far as property lines and why this app would help, is these people were walking an area similar to this with their agent, and it was 40 acres, so there's no way they could see, you know, each end of the line. And apparently the owner was also walking along with them, and he was saying, oh yeah, the line's right along here, and the agent kept telling these people, you need to get a survey done. And they looked into the price of the survey, and they didn't like what it was going to cost. And they said, no, we're just going to take this guy's word for it. He knows the land, obviously, or they thought so. And so you can guess where this is going. So the next, they bought the lot. The next year they went out and hired a builder, started building, and they had already poured the foundation and cleared an area. And the neighbor walks up and says, what are you guys doing? And sure enough, it turns out they were building the foundation right on in the middle of the line, so half of it was over the line. So you can imagine how much money that costs to, you know, replace the, fill back in, repair the damage they did, and then start all over. So again, this app is great, but you should never take it's just a tool to help you out. If you really want to know exactly where the lines are, you should always have a survey done. I can't stress that enough. You don't want to be that guy that started building a house that was halfway over the property line. So keep that in mind. Again, this app is a great tool, and it'll give you a good idea of where everything is. But again, you should really have the corner pins marked or have an actual survey done before closing, and then you can come out and see exactly what you're getting, where the lines are, and where you can build. So if you do want to get this app, you can find it on the App Store or anywhere you can get apps. And I pay $29.99, and it covers the entire state of Montana, maps the entire state. If you want all 50 states, it's $99.99. If you're looking to buy a large property here in Montana, here's some things to think about. So what you're going to see a lot here in Montana, especially on these bigger properties, are road easements, and that's for neighbors to access their property, and they have to get through yours to get to it. So like this one, this is an easement through here for the neighbor's property, but it's something to check into and something to think about, especially if you're at the end of the easement. There's only two houses on this one. Where I'm standing is the first one. There is one more property that goes behind me here back down into the woods. And if you're that particular guy, what you need to think about is the road maintenance and what happens in the winter, especially here in Montana with all the snow that we get. So if the piece of property you're looking at is the furthest one in that uses this easement, you're going to want to make sure you have some sort of road agreement or some sort of understanding as to who's going to maintain it in the winter, or if you're pitching in to hire a guy or one of you does it, it doesn't matter. Just make sure you have some sort of an agreement as to who's going to take care of the road, because you don't want to be 2 miles down the road and then get to this point and it's not plowed and then you can't get out, or you have to plow the whole thing yourself all the time. So the road easement is one of the things you definitely want to look into. And the thing about road easements is that they never go away. They go with the land. No matter how many times you sell the property, they stay with the land. So unless you and the neighbor agree to go and get rid of it and record a new easement, but unless the neighbor can get in a different way, they're never going to do that. So again, road easements are pretty common up here, but they're definitely something you need to look into. So another thing you want to think about is if you look over here, this particular property has a guest house with it. It actually has a caretaker's house and a guest cabin up a little further that way. But what you need to think about in this aspect of a property is, are there covenants or zoning that prohibit you from doing VRBO or Airbnb if that's what you want to do? Obviously, some people aren't going to want to do that, But if you're planning on, buying a big piece of property like this and renting out one of the houses or both of the houses or all of the houses, you want to make sure that that's allowed. So make sure you check into the covenants and the zoning, and you'd be surprised, even way out here in the middle of the woods, there are some areas that do have covenants or zoning. It just depends on how the property was developed in the beginning, and if the original owners put any kind of covenants down or rules down, or the county may have some sort of zoning out here too. So another thing to check into with the covenants is if there are any restrictions on animals. When you have big pieces of property like this, a lot of people like to have chickens, cattle, horses, whatever it may be. So that's just another thing to think about when you're reviewing the covenants, just to make sure you can do what you want to do. So as we talked about earlier, this property sits right along a stream, which is awesome. Who doesn't want this in their backyard? But one of the things you need to check into if you are buying a property along a stream or a river are the floodplain maps and the floodplains, because it's definitely going to affect your insurance depending on where the stream is in relation to your house or the road to get in there. On this particular property, it's not an issue at all, because as you can see, the stream is way below where the house is. We're way up there to the main house, so the stream can flood all at once and it's not going to affect anything on this property. But you just want to make sure that if you are looking at waterfront properties along a river, check into the stream and the flood zones in that area. This property borders National Forest Service land, and that's the land you can see up behind me. And that is awesome news, because nobody can ever build there, and it's always going to look like it does now. The only thing that some people think is bad news is obviously national forests are open to the public, so the public can walk right along the edge of your property as long as they stay in the Forest Service land. That's perfectly legal, because Forest Service land is public, as it should be. So along the lines of public usage, let's go back and take a look at the creek here. Montana stream laws allow people to use these public waterways as long as they stay below the high water mark. So people can wade down this creek and fish, or they can raft down it. And even though this river or stream runs through private property, people can still use it as long as they stay below the high water mark. So there's no such thing as, I don't care how much money you have here in Montana, you can't buy a huge piece of property and think that the stream or river is private. It's all, and I think that's a great thing here in Montana. And I know some states have different laws, but here in Montana, it's one of the best laws we have, is that everything is open to the public as far as streams and rivers go for fishing and recreating. So it doesn't matter how much money you have, you can never buy a huge piece of property and think you have your own private river in the backyard. People can use it as long as they stay below the high water mark. So I told you earlier about having a pond on this property. Well, this is an extensive water feature. It's a little creek that they built that goes down into the pond. So one of the things you want to check into here is to make sure the pump system and everything's working properly for this particular pond, or if you're at a similar property with any sort of water features or whatever, especially if you're looking at them in the winter. You just want to make sure everything's working properly before you get to the middle of summer and find out you got to replace pumps or dig something up. So this pond out here is one of the great features of this property. You can fish out here, you can paddleboard, just hang out by the water. They got a little peninsula where you can tie off your boats or paddle boards. It's also a great waterfowl habitat, so you're going to see all kinds of ducks and geese down here, and just a great addition to this piece of property. So another great feature of this property is they have a heat pump for the heating and cooling. And the reason I bring that up, and if a lot of the bigger homes around here use it because it's a super efficient way to heat and cool your house, but it's run, they have a bunch of lines that are buried out here in the yard. And so if you're looking at any property with a heat pump system, you want to make sure you know where all those lines are in the ground. How it works is it pumps a combination of water and antifreeze through the pipes. And even in the winter, the ground, as deep as they go, doesn't get as cold as the outside air. So then, say like 50 degrees, so they're just heating that up from 50 degrees up to 70 or whatever you want it at. And then same in the summer, it takes that 50-degree air and cools down the fluids and gives you a cooler house for much cheaper than a regular electric furnace or air conditioner. But my main point is you want to make sure you know where those lines are in the ground. So if you ever decide to dig something up, dig a big hole, put in a new barn or something, you're not tearing that up, because that'd get pretty expensive to replace. So the last thing I wanted to show you, and it's definitely not the least important, this is the wellhead. This is one of 2 wells out here. And when you buy a property here in Montana, you definitely want to check into the water rights. Make sure they've all transferred, and then they transfer into your name. Because as they say out here in the West, he who owns the water is king. So you don't want to get into a situation where someone else owns the rights to your water. So make sure you check that out, and make sure you have enough water, or you have the rights to enough water to do whatever it is you want to do out here. Now, let me show you a website that's very helpful, and I use it all the time when searching for Montana properties. Okay, so let's start out with the Montana Cadastral map here, or the site, and I will leave this link down below in the notes if you want to check it out yourself and play around with it. It's an awesome site. So as you can see on the main page, it shows all of Montana's 56 counties, and then where it really gets handy, I'll zoom in a little bit here. You can see the different colors, the different shadings. Those mean different things. The green is Forest Service land. This purple up here is actually Glacier Park. And then over here, Glacier County, that's reservation land. And there's the different reservations around Montana. You can see the different shading. But if you're looking for property and you want to know like what your neighbors are going to be like, or if you're just browsing around for property, there's a couple things you should use to give yourself more information. I mean, you're more than welcome to call me, but this will help you if you ever just want to play around with it at your own house. This site breaks down every piece of property in Montana, which is very cool. And so let's zoom in a little bit on our area here in Flathead Valley. So as you can see, let me zoom out a little bit more, just to give you, oops, that's too far. Just to give you a little perspective, each one of those squares is a township, which is 36 square miles, and each township has 36 sections in it, which is 1 square mile each. So there's a lot of land here in Montana. Let's zoom back in on that and zoom down. And so again, if you're looking for a specific piece of property, or if I get people calling me, hey, I want to border Forest Service land. Well, with this tool here, you can see if the property borders Forest Service land. So you can click on any one of these sections, or just keep zooming in. And as you can see here on the as you look around, some of these sections are divided up pretty small. Obviously, when you get into the towns, they're very small, where you got city lots, but you just need to zoom in more, and you can, each individual lot, you can get the information on, like this one, for example. I'm going to blur it out. Those people don't, I'm sure they probably don't want me advertising their particular piece of property, but when you click on this, it's all public information. It shows you, the acreage is 4.7 acres on that particular lot. And you can see if there's, buildings on it or not. It looks like it's just empty ground. We have 4 3/4 acres. And you can do that on any piece of property, around town. You can see the size of it. You can see the buildings that are on it. Anything you want to find out about that particular property. But if we zoom back out, like I was saying, if you're looking for stuff out in the mountains and you want to, see if it borders Forest Service land, let me go west of town here. Yeah, see over by Ashley Lake, this green is, government land. It doesn't even show up as who the owner is. Let me check. No, some of these are just blank. But on the legend here, you can see U.S. Department of Agriculture, and they break down all the land, and by the color coding it of the land. So again, just a really handy tool. Let's zoom out again. I want to show you another thing that I discovered. So in Montana, people ask all the time if you're allowed to buy land on the Indian reservation. And as you can see here, this outline shows the Flathead Reservation, and the orange color is actually tribal land. The answer is yes, you can buy land on the Indian reservation, but not all of it can be sold to people that aren't part of the tribe. So if you zoom in on, the Flathead Reservation here, we'll zoom in a little further. But this, like I said, the orange color here, it shows up as, the tribal ownership, and gives the address for their headquarters in Pablo there. But, like this piece of land here is not owned by the tribe. And, it can be sold if you're not part of the tribe. And anything that you see online on MLS, if it's for sale on there publicly, it's not going to be the tribal land. That won't show up ever on MLS. But interesting that you can zoom or find out anywhere you're at. If you're looking at this particular piece of property, you can see that it borders tribal land, or, this one totally borders it on 3 sides. So it's a good thing to know, a good little tool to use. And then this covers the whole state. So, as we zoom out, you can go over here to the east side of the state, which is a lot more wide open, and, zoom in on some of this and see what's going on here. And a lot of this is wildlife management areas, I believe, is the blue. So you can, again, let's go to the legend and see. Now, state of Montana, state land. So that's all, land that can't be purchased. But again, this is another reservation down here, but you can, find out property in any part of Montana, zoom in on, a particular piece if you're looking at it, and find out who the neighbors are. Each one, like I said earlier, each one of these squares, to put it in perspective, is 640 acres. So that's a pretty big chunk of ground. And it looks like this one, because eastern Montana, there's a lot more that isn't divided up. But you can see the deal here, and down here is 640 acres. So that's a whole section of land. And the other thing you can use, and I've showed you this in other videos, is, and you can use both of these combined with one another. Oops, I keep going the wrong way. Let's zoom back out to the full state here. But you can also use the Google Maps tool. And here again, it does not, the difference between the two is, with the Google Maps, you can get a satellite view and see what the land looks like around there. But it doesn't break it down like the Cadastral does for the actual piece of property. So if you're looking at a piece of land that has a river going through it, like this one, you can, zoom in on Google Maps and do your research there, and then go back to the Cadastral map and see how it how it is laid out, and who you can find out who your neighbors are, who borders you, and if it's, like this is, BLM land. So again, a handy tool. If you have any questions about it, please let me know. I will leave the links for this down in the notes, but it's kind of a fun thing to play around with, and very, handy, and gives you tons of information on anything you want about any piece of property in Montana. And like I said, it covers the entire state, all 56 counties. So I hope that helps. Here are some more issues that I've seen come up when people are buying land here in Montana. So one of the first things you need to think about here in Montana in the wintertime, if you're looking at land, is if you can even get to it. I came up to look at this piece of property and it's not even plowed. I was just able to get off the road and get to this point. So you got to walk about a half mile to even get to this lot, because there's really no reason to plow it right now. And so a lot of properties that you may be looking at could be in this same situation. I talked about it in our winter video as well, but make sure you have a good vehicle if you're driving around looking at properties, especially if they're outside of town, because as you can see right here, this road is so steep. If you don't have good tires, you're going to slide right down it. And the other thing, if you are looking at land in the winter, you need to find out too who's doing the plowing. If it's part of the HOA, if there is an HOA, or if it's all you, if you're going to need it plowed, or hire somebody to plow it for you. But obviously, as you can see in this road, you're gonna need to plow this, or you're never going to get up at it during the winter. If you do decide to look at properties like this in the winter, you may want to bring some snowshoes or cross-country skis. We've done that before to get back into some of these areas that aren't plowed, because it could be a pretty long walk, and to be trudging through a couple feet of snow is not a lot of fun. So yeah, keep that in mind if you're looking around out here in the winter. So if this spot looks familiar, it's because this is the exact place I did the video last fall about buying land in Montana, and I just wanted to show you what it's like in the winter around here. As you can see, the biggest difference is all the snow. So one of the things that comes up if you're looking at land in the winter with snow on the ground is finding the property pins. That's obviously a bigger challenge, and I would strongly suggest getting a surveyor involved or somebody with a metal detector to be able to find the pins with all this snow. Another thing is, I know that I was here in the fall, so I know nothing's under the snow, but you may want to beware of what you find under the snow. Obviously, you don't know if there's a bunch of garbage back there that's covered by the snow right now. You don't know what's under the snow. Right now there's a few feet of snow, so there could be all kinds of things under there. So what I would suggest when you find a piece of property is to go to Google Maps and search it so you get a satellite view during the summer, so you can see what's around it and if there is anything on the property. As far as walking around the property, again, a challenge with the snow. I talked about it earlier with snowshoes or cross-country skis. That is a good idea. If it's a big piece of land, you may even need a snowmobile. So these are just a few things to keep in mind. Another thing to consider also is just how easy it is to get in and out of the property during the winter. So it is a good idea to come up here and check out these pieces of property while there's snow on the ground. If you're going to live here year-round, you're going to need to know how hard it is to get in and out. Like I showed earlier, there can be some very difficult properties to access. This is fairly level, but again, something to think about if you're here in the winter. So if you're traveling here from out of state to look at properties during the winter, especially if they're off the grid properties, more than likely they're not going to be plowed, and you're going to need a way to get back to them if you want to tour them this time of year. So make sure you contact myself or the agent that has those properties to see if you can even get to them this time of year. But Montana is great in the winter. We have skiing, we have all the other winter sports, so if you enjoy winter activities, It's not a bad time to look at properties. It just takes a little extra work. So the first mistake people make, and it's the obvious one and could be easily avoided, is they don't do enough research about the neighborhood. Have you checked into the surrounding property? Are they going to build a subdivision right over here in the next couple years? Are there commercial businesses right around here that are going to make all kinds of noise? I've talked about it, I've done videos about it. Is there going to be a gravel pit, or is there a gravel pit nearby that you're going to hear? These are things you definitely need to look into and make sure you know the long-range forecast for this area or this neighborhood that you're buying in. The next thing people need to check into all the time is make sure you do a survey. As you can see over here, here's one of the property corners. A lot of times on these empty lots, you're not going to find survey pins, especially if it's a bigger acreage. This is 40 some acres, this particular property. So even if there are property stakes, you're not going to be able to see one corner to the other. So you want to make sure you walk the property and understand where the land runs and where the neighbors are, if there are going to be any neighbors, just so you know what you're getting into, and mainly so you build in the proper spot. There was a story I told a long time ago of people that bought a piece of property and they were just walking it with the owner. They weren't using another agent. And he said, oh yeah, our line goes right through here. And so the people were like, great, they bought it. The next spring they started building. And then sure enough, the owner of the property next door shows up and sees they're building on his land. They've already poured the foundation, everything. So you don't want to get into that kind of mess. So if there's not a survey that's been done, put it in the contract, or have me put it in the contract for you as part of your due diligence period, so you can make sure you know exactly where the lines are. Unfortunately, here in Montana, a lot of these properties that we go and look at, there are no stakes like this, so you never know what you're buying exactly. And with that survey, they'll also show you where the easements are. As you can see here, there's a road going that way and a road going down this way. So you just want to make sure that these roads are yours and not a neighbor that's going to have access right through the middle of your property all the time to get to their lot. There's tons of easements in Montana, and you can't get rid of those unless someone that is benefiting from the easement signs off on it, and why would they if they're benefiting from it? So make sure you understand where these roads go, who has access to them, because like I said, even though you bought this particular property, you can't make these easements go away if it is truly an easement. And that's something you'll find out with the survey and looking at the plat maps or any of the county records. The other thing I see people getting in trouble around here with is they don't do their research on the well depths in the area. Some of these lots around here, they're way up on a mountain. We went and toured a property last year and the guy's well was 2,000 feet deep. So that's a lot of money. I would strongly suggest calling all of the well companies before you even buy the land and figure out what the current price is for well drilling, because it definitely varies depending on price of steel and all kinds of things. So you want to make darn sure you know the cost of the well and what you're getting into. The other thing you can look at, there's obviously going to be some other wells that have been drilled in the area. So you want to just, and I can show you how, or I can do this for you. You want to get on the state site and check the other well depths in the area and see if they're all around 300 feet, then more than likely yours is going to be around 300 feet, and then you'll know with whatever the well company told you the exact or a ballpark figure of what it's going to be. But keep in mind, just because the other well depths are 300 feet, it all depends on where the aquifer sits and how the aquifer is laid out under that piece of property. So even though the neighbor's well might only be 150 feet, yours could end up being 500. We lived in a house a while back when we first moved to Montana, and our well was 30 feet deep. And we had all kinds of water, and then a guy drilled across the road, and because of where he sat and the luck of the draw, I guess, he had to go down 500 feet for the same amount of water. So keep that in mind, and that obviously is going to be one of the biggest, or could be one of the biggest costs in buying a piece of property before you build a house, is the cost of the well. And the last thing people don't ever think about is they're looking at property this time of year and it's beautiful and there's wildflowers growing and deer walking around and it's great, but they don't think about what this is going to look like in January. And depending on how far out you are and the roads, and if it's a county road or if it's a private road, you may end up having to plow your way out of these places. And a lot of times I've seen people that are all gung-ho about living off grid. Again, that's great and it's cool, and a lot of people do it, but if you're thinking you're going to get out to some of these properties in the middle of winter, well, good luck. There's feet and feet of snow that falls on the mountains around here, so if you're way up high, you're going to have a heck of a time getting in and out of there because the county doesn't plow every road. Most of these roads on the off-grid properties are private and you have to take care of it yourself. Some of them, there's other people that live along the road, so you have a neighborhood agreement on paying someone to plow, or maybe one of the guys that lives there plows it. But make sure you keep that in mind and do your research in the summer before you buy the property and find out how you're going to get in and out of here in the middle of winter. So again, if you're buying property in Montana, make sure you do your homework. I'm here to help with that and point you in the right direction, but I don't want you to buy a piece of property that may be beautiful, but you don't have access to it, or it's going to cost a fortune to drill a well, or you have neighbors driving through it. There's all kinds of things that you just need to be careful of before you buy land here in Montana. And finally, let's talk about the website that you can figure out well depths of the neighboring properties. This will give you a great idea of what you're probably in for if you're drilling a well on your property. One of the things that could end up costing you a ton of money is the well. Let's go take a look at how you can figure the approximate cost of what a well is going to be on your land. So when I used to do research for people in the well depths in the area, I used to go to a different site that you needed a membership or you had to sign up for, and so I never wanted to put it on a video. But then I found this site, which is awesome. It's the Montana Bureau of Mines and Geology site, and I'll put the link down below. And it's not only can you look up well logs, but they have earthquakes, surface water monitoring, coal samples map, abandoned and inactive mines map. I mean, there's plenty of rabbit holes you can go down that I've gone down, but that is not what this video is about. So we'll stick to the point here and go to the ground watering data right here, or groundwater data, not ground watering. Again, it covers the entire state. What you want to do with this is, if you're out looking for property, and we'll go through a whole example later, but you'll obviously know the address of the land you're looking at, and then you can just zoom in to that particular area and look at all these blue dots are wells, which is kind of incredible. The amount of wells that are in this state. You can obviously see the wilderness areas where there aren't any, but here in the valley, in the Flathead Valley, there are tons and tons of wells. So what you do, again, you zoom in, you can see they have the highways on here, the different towns, but you can zoom in and say you're looking at, something over here off of Whitefish Ranch Road. You click on this one, and you can see this log, and it'll tell you exactly how deep it is. It's 700 feet deep. They hit water at 230, and they're getting 13 gallons a minute. So you can go back. Again, if you're looking in that neighborhood, you want to look at other ones that are right near there, and then click on the one right across the road. That one's only 480 feet deep, but the water level's at 220. I'm not sure why the first guy went so deep when he hit water that shallow, but again, that the water level at the time of drilling these wells was at 220 feet. So again, go back to another one over in the same area and see what we have here. That one, again, 420 feet, and the water's at 250. So it looks like all these wells in the area. Let's look at one more just to be sure. Go a little north and see what it's like up there. This one's 300 feet. So basically you're looking at probably 300 to 600 feet. This one's getting 40 gallons a minute. You're looking at 300 to 600 feet, and so you can now budget that in. I just talked to some people a couple weeks ago that just got bids on a well, and they called 3 different companies in our valley. They got bids between $60 a foot up to $110 a foot, and then another $5,000 to $15,000 for the pumping system and the electrical once you get the well in the ground. So this is a good thing to utilize if you're looking around, just so you can know how much extra money you're going to be spending just on the well. So like I said earlier, this is just in our valley that I was showing you this map, but this website or this data covers the whole state. So if you're looking for land in other parts of Montana, this is also the place to go to. As you can see, there's tons of wells everywhere. I clicked on a lot of these, and I'm not sure that every one of these is an actual well. I think there's some sort of data points, because when you click on them, they just come up with that, and it doesn't really show any data, any well depths, or it doesn't look like it's an actual well. So I'm not sure what all those are. If you are looking at land in a certain area and there's other people around that have drilled wells, it will show up on this site. Once you install the well, you're going to have to budget for a septic system. They're going to average around $10,000 to $25,000, and it's going to depend on a whole bunch of things. It's going to depend on the soil that you're working with. It's going to depend on the size of the system you're putting in. Septics are based on the amount of bedrooms you're going to build in your house and the distance from the house to the site of the septic. All septic systems, for obvious reasons here in Montana, have to be at least 100 feet from the well site. So that's another thing to take a look at once you're designing the land and designing where everything's going to go. So let's go look at an example of what all this can cost on a regular 5-acre lot. All right, so first let's just assume you're looking around for 5-acre lots. So I did a search for just exactly 5-acre lots. You can see there's only 45 that came up, but let's just click on this one right here. We'll go to the one for $325,000. This is down in Lower Valley, south of Kalispell. We'll click on it here and get some more information. One thing you do want to think about too that is going to be an added cost is you're probably looking at the taxes thinking, wow, it's only $830. Well, in Montana, they base your taxes off of the improvements to the land. So once you build something on there, that's obviously going to go up, so you're going to have to budget for that as well. It's not going to be $800. So let's say we got $325,000 in the lot. Now we go out and we look for the well depths in that area, and just to make it easy, let's say that we figure we're going to have to go 300 feet. And again, with the bids we got earlier, we got a bid for $60, $90, and $110 a foot. Let's just go $100 to be safe. So you take 300 times 100, again, to make it easy, and it comes out to $30,000. And then you add in another 10 for the pump system and electrical for the well. So now you're up to 40. You're now at 365. And then the septic, again, going to depend on a lot of things. We'll go right in the middle between 10 and 25,000. We'll go, let's say 17. And there's another $17,000 on top of this. Now you're up to $382,000. And you might want to also think about, obviously this lot that I'm showing you is not the lot we're talking about. It's just a piece of ground I filmed for demonstration purposes, so don't think this is for sale. It is not. If we were up in the woods or up in the mountains, then you're looking at putting in a road and maybe running power up the road, and all those costs too are going to add up. You're looking at adding quite a bit of money if you're going up the side of a mountain and have to build a road with a bunch of switchbacks and then trenching in all the power. That's the other thing. You're going to have to call the power company, the electrical company, they'll come out and give you an exact bid on, they'll measure how many feet it is from the power source to where you're going to build your house, and then they'll look at the soil, and that's why I can't give you an exact number, because it's going to vary on every lot. But again, we're already up to $382,000, and that's before you dug a hole for the foundation. So these are all things to keep in mind when you're buying a lot or when you're looking at property. All these are going to play into the total cost. And finally, the last thing you need to keep in mind is the covenants, if there are any covenants on this piece of property. A lot of times, different subdivisions have rules about the size of the house that you are required to build, the style of the house, the look of the house, sometimes the siding, it just depends. But all these things can add costs to the house that you may not be thinking about when you're just looking at the land. And finally, the HOA fees, if you are in a subdivision, they can get quite expensive. Usually when you're out in the country a little bit, if you're looking at a bigger piece of land, it'll just cover road maintenance. But if there's a gate and common areas, it'll cover that. So again, all these things are added costs that you don't normally think about when you're just out looking at property. If you made it through that entire video, congratulations. If you wouldn't mind doing me a favor, please leave a comment that says I made it at the end, so I can see how many people actually did watch this entire video.
Thank you for watching our video. Please call, text, or email for more information, and don't forget to watch our other videos about Montana.